Behind the Built Environment, the podcast from BESA, the UK's leading trade body for the building engineering services sector.
My name is David Fries, and this is the Behind the Built Environment podcast, episode 3. And our guest today is Dr. Philip Webb. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you very much.
Phil is Chief Executive of Health and Wellbeing 360, who recently became BESA affiliate members. So congratulations and welcome to the BESA community.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Webb is an experienced healthcare professional with extensive knowledge of academia, healthcare industry and the public sector. He's currently the industry representative of the Promoting Awareness of Air Pollution Delivery Group for the Welsh Government. Dr. Webb has a PhD in cell and molecular biology. His postgraduate academic work interests include health economics, prioritization and advanced physical and digital engineering, including 3D printing and artificial intelligence. His experience includes a 10-year career in industry with 2 major pharmaceutical companies within sales, marketing, R&D, and medical and regulatory affairs. 20 years experience within UK National Health Service, in national commissioning, specialised services, regional cancer delivery, innovation, and value-based healthcare. A firm believer in user-centric design and in understanding the importance of socialization and the human-machine interface in the development of technology, and committed to net zero, smart and intelligent technology development, and importance of making work and workplace fun. So thank you for coming today.
It's a pleasure
Phil.
being here.
We always kick off with a few quick fire questions. So the idea is yes or no to these.
Okay.
So the first one, is indoor air quality a major health issue for the whole population?
Yes.
Do engineers hold the solution to the problem?
Yes.
Will filtration, purification and airflow technologies play a part in this?
Yes, as well as monitoring.
Is the state of our indoor air quality a public awareness issue?
Yes.
And finally, is the net zero agenda an obstacle to good indoor air quality?
Possibly.
Yes or no? Yes. Okay. You did better than most, actually. It's very difficult just to say yes or no. We should turn it into a quiz game. We're going to kick off, if we may, with, very little public money and resources are being spent on this issue. But you think that air quality is responsible for a very high number of excess deaths, more than the COVID pandemic, is your view, and cancer and heart disease and mental health combined. Where do the figures come for this? How do you justify that?
So the figures come from nationally available statistics from public health bodies. So the numbers that I usually quote when I quote numbers are all from verified factual statements made by accredited and regulated bodies like NHS Public Health Wales, NHS Public Health England. And it's quite astounding when you start talking about some of the impact of the figures. So I usually talk in terms of numbers, in terms of deaths per 100,000 that are statistically adjusted for populations. And if you look at the COVID issue, and everyone knows that COVID was an international pandemic and a horrible time period in people's lives, really. It saw the biggest changes to our civil liberties with lockdown. Things that are unprecedented, didn't happen since the Second World War. Really severe political measures to reduce infection rates for COVID, okay? COVID death rates per 100,000 were around 34.8 in Wales per 100,000 population, okay? And if you can put that into context for major chronic diseases, cancers are about 278 per 100,000. Cardiovascular diseases, heart attacks and strokes are about 290,000. The biggest killer per 100,000 is mental health, which reaches about 1,000 per 100,000, okay? But when you look at the statistics which are verified from national data on the impact of air quality, they range from about 1,500 per 100,000 in Wales to estimates around 10,000 per 100,000 in parts of London. In fact, if you combine all the other diseases together, they don't reach the same mortality rates that poor air quality actually reaches and attains. And in fact, WHO just had a publication today to say that 1,800 people die every day in Europe just from poor air quality.
1,800 people a day?
A day.
Well, that's a staggering figure, isn't it? Before we go back onto that, what are the solutions that engineers offer that can help this, particularly with indoor air quality?
So I think, Dave, the way that governments have tended to look at this is that they tend to concentrate their activities and their available resources on ambient air quality or outdoor air quality. It's the things that you see on all sustainability kind of reviews and programs. It's associated with pollution, vehicle pollution, agricultural pollution, etc. Yet very little attention has been placed on actual exposure risks to our populations. So if you look at some of the statistics, Western populations spend over 90% of their time indoors. So even on a maths basis, exposure time for populations that we're involved with are all about indoor environmental quality. And it's probably the indoor environmental quality which has been an unrecognised and very silent killer in those statistics that I just mentioned at the beginning of this interview.
But what sort of systems can we, as engineers, install that mitigate that problem, mitigate the risk?
So if we believe that we're spending 90% of our time indoors, engineers and architects build buildings. They design buildings. They look at the materials around buildings. They look at planning around infrastructure. They look at the standards and specifications for the building themselves. Engineering, facilities management and building management systems, in my opinion, have a tremendous potential to improve the overall health and well-being of populations, bearing in mind we're spending 90% of our time in buildings, our homes, our places of work, public spaces, schools. So if we have the ability to design think our way through better buildings, we will end up with better health and well-being for our populations.
One of the things we often say is that we install products, we stick them in and then don't really check that they work. A critical feature of this is the actual long-term operation and maintenance, isn't it? So it's no good having a fantastic air filtration system, ventilation system, purification systems, if you're only concerned about whether they've been installed, but they don't work. How is that? How do we ensure that?
So I think it's the regulation around facilities management. I think that apart from a legal responsibility to ensure buildings are maintained to a certain quality and standards, and that includes all the technology within the building, including ventilation systems, filtration systems, purification systems, sensors, meter and monitoring, which we don't do enough of, and hopefully we'll cover a little bit about how we actually know that particular environments have got particular concentrations in there. I think there's a social and an ethical responsibility on us as engineers to be able to do this in a way that not only puts innovation at the beginning and at the centre of any building design, but maintains it through the longevity of the building. And we're talking of the fact that actually, from a building's perspective, we're probably reaping the health and well-being benefits or disbenefits for really poor planning in the 1970s around buildings. So if we are very interested, and I think we should be, in the well-being of our future generations and our children and their children, we really need to focus on the 60-year life cycle and lifetime of a building. That's how long they last for. That's how long we should be maintaining them at a particular standard and a particular level.
I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But there is a problem of perception, is there not, with air quality? People are rightly outraged by pollution of our rivers and the beaches, but you can see it and it has a direct impact. Whereas air quality issues tend to take much longer, often only appear at post-mortem as the cause of death. How do you educate, the NHS clients that actually you need to invest in this now for a long-term prevention of disease in the future?
So that's a really good question. I'll use a medical anecdote to illustrate this. Hypertension never used to be measured, but it's a leading cause of cardiovascular death, and people just didn't bother measuring it until they realised the consequences of very high blood pressure on the human system, and particularly cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. Okay, we now routinely measure your blood pressure when you go into a GP's. If there's anything wrong with you, they usually take a blood pressure check. They usually check your heart rhythm, okay? It's exactly the same with buildings. If you're not measuring anything, and this goes back to the conversation that we might go into about sensoring, metering, and monitoring, you actually don't know what the problem is, but you need to know what's happening in a building and in various different parts of a building at any given time. Because as we'll see, and we'll talk a little bit about the British standard, which is BSI 40102, that mandates you to be able to meter and measure what's happening in your environment and in your building, and then look at rectification around how you use your ventilation systems, how you use advanced digital technologies like artificial intelligence to tell a building Don't open the windows outside because the outdoor monitor is saying that there are high levels of pollution for PM 2.5 and nitric oxide. Keep the windows closed. The BMS system will kick in. It will ventilate, purify, and take it down to levels that are consistent with BSI 4102. So it's the advancement of the combination of different technologies and smarter technologies that I believe is the future for buildings in the next 5 to 10 years.
Again, I don't think I disagree with any of that. I've been in buildings that have advanced BMS controls and the windows open automatically when you're in a room. And people didn't like that. They don't feel there's a control. The point I'm getting to is how do you inform people that the air quality in this building is bad, is poor? Because they might get a headache eventually from high CO2 levels, say. But how do you immediately inform people you're going into a space that is not good for you, and these are the consequences of that, in a way that doesn't scare them to death, but just informs them?
So I'll take the scare them to death bit first. Yeah, because people get less afraid when they become familiar with information. And the familiarization of the information that surrounds us, bearing in mind that we're inundated with information on a day-to-day basis, okay, on your phone, on TV screens, on monitors that exist everywhere. So I came through the tube, there's monitors everywhere. There's nothing stopping us informing the public of the air or environmental quality in a particular space because we're already used to monitors being around everywhere. We're already used to being able to be told on the TV that the temperature today is going to be 18 degrees centigrade. The pollen count is going to be high or low if you're allergic to pollen. What we're trying to say is part of that information dialogue needs to become mainstream to people. People should be getting used to the fact that actually weather reports should say your temperature today is this, it's going to be a bit cloudy, it's going to be a bit humid, the pollen count is this. By the way, your local pollution level in your surrounding area is going to be this today. So if you're thinking of going out on a picnic, the best places to go out on a picnic for pollution for outdoors is going to be this area or this area. And on an indoor basis, you should be able to walk into a building and it should be able to tell you on a large iPad on the side of the wall exactly what the environmental conditions are in that particular building based on the good quality sensors that building has and an interpretation that allows you to have health and impact interpretations for you so you don't have to worry too much about it. But you should be able to form a choice about where you go. And part of the choice agenda is the bit that we think is going to change human behaviours. If you're faced with information and a choice about which shopping mall you want to go because the indoor environment in St David's Centre in Cardiff is at such and such a level, but if you went to another shopping mall, the indoor environment is better, most people would act on the information given to them and choose to do one or the other, which then derives the issue around commercialisation. Commercial advantage for people who own buildings is to ensure that their buildings provide the best environment and the best experience for anyone using their buildings.
How advanced are we in that link between good air quality and, say, productivity or something that has commercial value to clients? The reason I would say that is it's fine doing the temperature report every day, the weather report, because I can't do anything about that. But the moment you tell somebody who I'm asking to come and work in a building that I own and occupy that actually the air quality is rubbish, I have a duty to do something about it. So I could see that actually better off if I don't know, then I don't have to do anything about it. It's that link between the commercial value of giving people clean air.
Dave, let's unpick this, okay? So if you're an employer, you employ people and you'd like them to come back to the place of employment post-COVID now because people feel that productivity has dropped slightly because people are working at home, okay? So you want to positively incentivize your workforce for coming and working in your office now, right? You run a sickness and absence rate, and there was already good evidence linking high sickness and absence rates with poor quality environments that we're talking. If you talk about the NHS, their sickness and absence rate is about 7.2% to 8%, okay? Of a workforce, that's multi-hundreds of thousands of people. So even if you look at government policy, so there's a commitment manifesto for people to put more professionals and train more professionals for the NHS. Surely you'd be better off creating better environments for them so when they went to work, they didn't get ill. And actually, if you do the maths on that, that creates more people returning to work than you would ever be able to employ and train in a shorter space of time. So my retort back to somebody who is an organisation that has people is that the best way to get the best people is to prove that you care for them. And you prove that you care for them for creating the best environment for them to work in, number one. You retain them from creating the best environment to work in, number two. And they don't go off as sick if you create the best environment for them to work in as well. And actually, your conversation with your staff would be, come to work. It's a better place for you to work. You will be more productive and you will be weller and healthier than you would be at home.
Actually, that conversation came up today. So we invested in air quality products for our office, and the air is cleaner and it's cooler. So both Claire and I came in today because it was better in there than at home, as they say. We touched on the development of a new British standard 40102 Part 1, which you were heavily involved in the development of. Can you tell us a bit about that and what drove you to get involved in that?
So that's part of our story about how we became Health and Wellbeing 360, really, Dave. Originally, BSI 4102 was driven by EFT Consult, which is part of the group that we now work for. And their perception at the time, this goes back pre-COVID when this actually kicked off, originally as a PAS, they looked at the health and well-being impacts that were happening in and around built environments. And they went through a process of looking at international standards to see what the measures and the parameters would be to measure and to be able to do something about indoor environmental quality in buildings. What they actually found is that the international standards all disagreed with each other. WHO doesn't relate to what the UN said, doesn't relate to what different countries said, doesn't relate to what different sectors said. So they thought having a unified PAS at the time to be able to be consistently measuring the same thing across geographical areas would be a really good thing to do. And what actually happened was COVID came. They had to wait until COVID finished from a British standards perspective, but then there was an unprecedented speed of accelerating the PAS to a British standard. So literally it went through in record time because there was an acknowledgement from British standards that this type of standard was critical in moving us forward on the built environment engineering agenda. Now, that went through EFT Consult. At that time, my company was called Respiratory Innovation Wales Limited, which was a company funded by Welsh Government specifically to look at the population impacts of innovation in the respiratory space. So we were working on exactly the same thing, but from a very different perspective. We were taking a health and wellbeing, health and social care perspective around this. EFT Consult were taking a technical building engineering perspective around this. And then on the 29th of February at midnight, our natural progression was to go to a limited private company from Welsh Government, which we completed with EFT, and we became Health and Wellbeing 360, combining the health and social care approaches that we had adopted on population level health and wellbeing, together with a technical building and services engineering perspective that was promoted and developed by EFT, resulting in the British standard.
We're talking about sort of whole building solutions to this. There's been a big problem with the quality of metering and monitoring devices for airborne contaminants. What do you think needs to be done about that?
So I think there's been largely a positive response, particularly in the low-cost sensor area. So what we're really talking about is low-cost but reliable sensors that can be deployed at scales. Yeah. If you compare these, and I don't know whether you're familiar with them, with the government-funded big URLs that exist and dotted around through DEFRA, okay? Those sensors are very sensitive, very specific, but they cost in the hundreds of thousands. Right? You're talking about £50,000 to £100,000 for a unit like that. We know in the buildings environment that is unaffordable on infrastructure. Nobody can afford to put that type of level sensor in place in buildings at scale, and we're talking about trying to scale these up across all buildings. Yeah. So in the low-cost sensor sector, we're probably talking about sensor arrays. So if you talk about the British standard, we're trying to work towards a British standard array that covers about the 11 variables in the British standard: heat, light, humidity, gases, particulates. Okay, so we're talking about the £400 to £600 per sensor, not the £100,000 sensors. Yeah, there are key issues around this though. Firstly, is the British standard advocates concentrations measurements, not derivatives. Yeah. So we would not want people to invest in sensors that derived a calculation based on voltages that didn't actually measure concentrations at all. Yeah. We think that they are largely unreliable. And in the sector that we're in, poor quality data and information leads to poor quality decisions made on people, which, as I've said to you, results in massive amounts of mortality rates per 100,000. Okay. So we want good quality data based on good quality sensors that measure concentrations that come in at an affordable price to deploy, whether it's your home, so the British standard on domestic has started, as you may be aware. We want them in commercial buildings, public spaces, etc. Now, we need to be able to independently verify that the sensors work to existing parameters when they're tested. So we are looking for the development of an independent testing sensor for low quality sensors. We're already having conversations with some university partners about where we set this up and how we do it, and actually not to make price of testing a barrier to the industry. So this also has got to be at low cost and reasonable. Then we're looking at how do you actually get this in a place where we can scale this up. So does this need to be about infrastructure development at the point of architectural development and planning stage for buildings? Does it then gets absorbed in the cost of the building? How we looking at retrofitting? So this requires an industry think about how best to embed some of these technologies at low cost, but still reliable and deployable in the way that we look at buildings, both new buildings and retrofitting.
But it is the key, is it not? That until you've measured it, you can tell what the air quality is. You can't do anything about it.
Yeah, and I'd go back to the medical analogy. You never sit in front of a doctor and he says, I know what's right for you just by looking at you. Yeah, there's usually a set of diagnostics that are done, and we're saying exactly the same for buildings. You have to be able to identify in order to rectify.
Makes the invisible visible to people. How long before you think that every building will have air quality, environmental meters and monitoring devices, just as standard? It's just a thing we all have.
So I think this should become, there's two ways of looking at it. The first one is, if we collectively believe that this is the correct thing to do for buildings, then we have a collective responsibility to ensure that the standards that apply are basically maintained and embedded in the way that we're design thinking buildings. Okay, that's the first thing. BSI 40101 came into being in April last year, and we've deliberately spent time trying to make people aware of it so as they don't get a surprise when your insurance company gets a notification to say that your building's not compliant with BSI 40102. We don't want to make an enemy of the partners that we need to work with. So there's a process of awareness that people become familiar and aware of the standards and what it's required to implement them at affordable cost. The other way of looking at it is competition. Industry thrives on competition. And there's a conversation that we've had with hoteliers. If you really want an advantage on TripAdvisor, rather than just price, advertise that your entire hotel chain and every single room in it is equipped with a way of telling the person who's booked that room exactly what the environmental quality is in their room and in their hotel, and actually positively promote it as you will get your best health and well-being experience because we have state-of-the-art technology that ensures that your stay at the Celtic Manor or at the Hilton Hotel is protected and you know what the environmental quality is in your stay, a positive experience. So there's the legislative bits that you have to do it, and then there's a competitive bit, which is can people make a competitive advantage, which affects their price point, on how they sell environmental quality to people using their services. So hotels, cruise liners. I've been on Great Western Railway in the Tube. Yeah, how do you positively use the fact that you spent money to improve your environmental quality to get a commercial advantage and a return on investment by promoting it? And we believe that actually results in several pounds on your price point, if you're a Costa Coffee, for example, or several pounds on your booking rate on booking.com.
That requires a complete flip on the current status, though, because people don't value building engineering services until they haven't got it. Because if you get it right, they don't notice, because they're not hot, they're not cold. And they can't hear it, can't see it or smell it. And therefore, it's not something that impacts them till it doesn't work and they're suddenly hot or they're in the dark or whatever. This still requires you to be able to say, hey, look, the air quality is good in here, to promote that. But I completely get that. Can we move on to a topical thing, which is about black mold and the impact of black mold, which we've seen, I think, nationally in some pretty awful cases in homes. Do you think there's another scandal heading our way through mechanical ventilation with heat recovery that's been badly installed and is not effective, not working, and therefore we effectively have a sealed building but not correctly ventilated? I think
it goes back to design principles, if I'm being honest, Dave. Okay, so if we have a conversation with the industry about what we're trying to create in reality, right? So I was delighted to present to SIPSI Patrons Group. And we had a conversation about this, okay? So there are fundamental questions for the building and engineering services industry. Why are you building buildings in the first place? Yeah. Are you building them in a way that just stops you being sued for poor design, right? Which is the minimum, very conservative way of building a building, right? So I'm building this, but I'm only building it so I can't be sued as a consequence of it legally, okay? Or are you building a good quality building, right? And if you're building a good quality building, in reality, what's the difference in the price point for how much it costs to actually build it? Because the difference of being a poor building and a good quality building is actually negligible, particularly if you're looking at some of the suggestions we're making on the embedding of technology as part of the infrastructure of the building, okay? So I don't think it's a big jump to move away from building adequate quality, defensible buildings to actually building good quality buildings based around the design principle of the health and well-being of the users of that building at the centre of it. There's a bit that my chair, Dave Keefe, always said, which is if you look at it and design a building from a net zero and decarbonisation perspective, you end up with a hermetically sealed, well-performing box, which is horrible to actually be in there as a human being. We're not trying to build unlivable buildings and unworkable buildings. We're trying to build good buildings.
I think the same could be true of the Building Safety Act, where we seal them for fire safety, but neglect the ventilation. We're still buying it at the cheapest price. And all these products are perfectly good. I mean, mechanical ventilation heat recovery is a fantastic product, but when poorly installed, causes problems. So do we have a skills and training problem in the UK that we need to address?
It depends. Right, I always look at the definition of a problem. I don't see it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. I think that there's an opportunity to address skills and training. There's an opportunity to look at good design thinking, both architecturally and in terms of designing buildings, period. I think that there's plenty of evidence about things we can learn from previous failings in the past. We've gone through decades of different types of buildings being developed, all of which have got recorded deficiencies against the design of the building. So I don't think it's too far a push for us to learn from the failures of the future to design better for the future. The past should light our way to build better buildings for our future generations. So I don't think it's a huge step to do it. I think there's an opportunity to train people to think differently when they're designing buildings, as well as the ability to then install and develop the installation of new technologies in buildings. But it comes all back to design thinking. So I used to do a lot of work with IBM, and the first thing that IBM would say on any given problem, in inverted commas, is take as much time as possible to design think what you think you're dealing with, and then get as many views into how you're dealing with it as possible.
Somebody, I think, a couple of European associations around this area issued a manifesto recently calling for good air quality to become a basic human right in European law. Do we need a new Clean Air Act?
So NHS, well, not the NHS, Welsh Government have just produced a Clean Air and Soundscapes Act for Wales for 2024. And it's quite interesting because there's certain devolved powers for Wales that it's got direct control of, particularly around buildings. Now, the dialogue with Welsh Government, as with all governments, has largely been around ambient air quality to begin with. But because of certain lobbying and a consideration of the actual facts around exposure times and risk, they've started to think about the impact of indoor air quality actually on the population. So that's an emerging thing coming from Wales. They've already got a new act. I was at the Senedd when it got passed. Legislation is one thing, human behaviours are another. So I'll put a different spin on this. If Mrs. Jones talked to Mrs. Williams and liked Mrs. Williams' new house, and Mrs. Williams said, you know what, my house has got ventilation in there, it's got purification in there, I go into my front room where as soon as I walk through the door, and there's my little keypad for my security system, and there's a little iPad on there that tells me every single room's environmental quality, right? And little Johnny, he's got asthma. He hasn't had an asthma attack since we moved into this new house, yeah? Temperature's fantastic. My energy bill's actually reduced. We'll talk about the relationship between energy and air quality in a minute, yeah? Mrs. Jones turns around and says, where the hell how much did that cost you, Mrs. Williams? Same as it cost you, Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones as a consumer starts to want what Mrs. Williams has got, right? And I would say legislation is one thing, legislative bodies are one thing, okay? The real thing we need to get to is how you drive human behaviours to want the benefits of environmental quality. why they want it, whether they want it for themselves or whether they want it for their families or their children, why people would want something like this. And I think the consumer side of this and the consumer advantage around this is the thing that will actually change and drive human behaviours, not the legislation. The legislation is about organisations who would want to build in a specific way. Yeah, the driver commercially comes from demand from people, and demand from people is about an awareness program of why you would want this for yourself and your family.
Okay, so that ends my kind of formal questions on this. And so I'd like to really try and summarise what we've learned today from you. 90% of us spend 90% of our time in a building. Therefore, there's significant social value to getting the environment correct within those buildings. The solution to the problem is that you first identify the air quality by good monitoring, good metering of the air quality within buildings.
Yes, I would broaden it to environmental quality because you have to include heat, humidity, temperature.
So it's not a single thing you need. It's a range of things that you need to monitor that improve well-being, shall we say?
Yes.
The benefits of a good environment, as we said, are a huge social benefit. But actually, if we invested more in the indoor air quality, the environment of our buildings, we would be able to reduce the NHS bill through prevention of ill health rather than waiting for people to get ill and treated.
Massively.
And in fact, the poor air quality in particular is killing more people than a range of other diseases in this world. The building engineering services sector has the ability to massively influence this agenda and to deliver buildings that actually work. In BESA, we describe it as the heart and the lungs of the building, the stuff that makes a building work. So the benefits of that are clearly there. And what we have to do as an industry is work out that value proposition that people start to value the air they breathe in a different way than they currently do.
Absolutely correct.
And that they should use the British Standard as a kind of a template to how we are going to take part in this journey to improve everybody's mental health, physical health and well-being.
I think that's a brilliant summary.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Phil. You can come again. So final question. Are you optimistic about the future or pessimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic about the future, actually, because I think there are certain moments in time that we can actually positively, in reality, do something about a problem. One of the reasons why I moved away from the NHS and went into the job that I'm doing currently is because the NHS doesn't tackle population level wellness and disease prevention well, because it can't affect change in the areas that it needs to. It can't look at energy. It's not involved in food. It's not involved in buildings. It's not involved in environmental controls. And those are the biggest key determinants of health that actually work out whether you're going to end up in hospital in the first place and what stage of your life you are going to end up in front of a doctor anyway. And as I said to Claire, there's a calculation that I'd like to end on, okay? So you are going to spend 7,256 times the amount that you're going to see your doctor in a building that you're going to be in, whether it's a public space, your home, or a place of work. So even if these interventions were 7,256 as good as seeing a doctor, okay, we'd still be in front of the NHS in providing good health and good well-being. So the opportunity to change things for the population, for the UK as a whole, for Europe and global, is massive just through changing the way that we think about buildings.
Dr. Phil Webb, Chief Executive of Health and Wellbeing 360, thank you very much for coming to the Behind the Built Environment podcast.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And now for the BESA news. This week sees World Refrigeration Day, and to tie in with the coolest day of the year, we have launched a new technical bulletin, TB57R290 in air conditioning and heat pump equipment. And that rolls off the tongue. It's a really catchy marketing title, which is available to download for free on the BESA Knowledge Shop. Also, we offer a range of refrigeration and F-gas courses via the BESA Academy. And if you are looking to subcontract F-gas work, then look no further than the UK's leading F-gas register, Refcom, which has over 8,000 F-gas approved companies on it. To tie in with today's podcast talking about air quality, last week we celebrated Clean Air Day at the Wave in Bristol. And we want to remind everyone that we have a suite of award-winning free IAQ and mould guidance available to download, again on the BESA Knowledge Shop. We've launched the BESA Manifesto with our range of policy proposals for the next UK government, which includes fair payment, building safety, IAQ, net zero and skills, all the burning issues which affect our members daily. The digital skill card is now live for both Apple and Android users, enabling contractors to assess site quicker via the skill card QR code on your mobile. Plus, it reduces the amount of plastic use, so we're all playing our part in reaching our net zero targets. Visit the skill card website to find out more. Whether or not you like it, footy fever is sweeping the nations, not with England's performances to date and Scotland's untimely exit, but with the kick-off of UEFA Euro 2024, we've been working on something exciting, which we can't wait to share exclusively with BESA members next month. We know the Building Safety Act can be challenging to grasp, which is why we've developed a very straightforward interactive guide that uses football analogy, making it easier for you to understand what your role or position is and what your responsibilities are for meeting organisational capabilities and individual competencies in the Building Safety Act. And the Building Safety Act applies from everything from a shed to the shard. The Building Safety Act Advisory Group met last week to review the contents, so we're making our final tweaks before our mid-July launch of the BESA Building Safety Act. Play It Safe campaign, so watch this space. And finally, the deadline is fast approaching for submitting your entries in this year's BESA Industry Awards, taking place at the Brewery, London, on the 17th of October. Entries are coming in thick and fast, so make sure you, your employees, colleagues, apprentices and businesses get the recognition they so well deserve. Deadline, Friday the 12th of July, so visit thebesa.com/the BESA Awards to submit your entries for free. So thank you for watching and listening to the Behind the Built Environment podcast. Join us for the next episode in about a month's time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Behind the Built Environment podcast from BESA. If you like what you heard today, then please follow and rate us on your favourite podcast app. Come and join us over on LinkedIn, BESA Group, and carry on the conversation. And if you want to find out more about joining the BESA community, then please visit thebesa.com to start your journey with us today.